Hello and welcome. I'm Anna Pedrazzini, and this is Constanza Zinkgräf on behalf of all 5 authors of this study. We are researchers in the fields of communication, psychology, education, and neuroscience, and we work at CONICET and Comahue National University in Argentina. We study the creation of multimodal text and cartoons by children and adolescents. In this study, we argue that humor and cartooning are effective means to engage teenagers in sensitive topics, as well as to enhance their empathic concern and perspective taking. Drawing on a broad conception of humor, we aimed to analyze whether and how students managed to create humorous incongruity in cartoons about social inequality and social empathy.
Cartoons are rich multimodal texts in which multiple visual and verbal signs are closely related, not only to convey meaning, but also to create a humorous incongruity. The multimodal nature of cartoons is manifested by the fact that readers can access what characters say, think, feel, or do. For that purpose, authors deploy a wide variety of narrative resources, such as bubbles, motion lines, and ideograms. Cartoons are also emotional and thought-provoking tools. The emotional impact of image is widely known. Besides, cartoonists not only seek to move, but also provoke, criticize, and make people think. Incongruity is the main condition for a text to be humorous. This means that we often find a mismatch, a violation of expectations. It takes place when one or more unusual or unsuitable elements are associated. Kessler defines this or refers to this mechanism as besociation. Incongruity plays with language and the way in which characters and situations are depicted. Incongruity is shown when norms and everyday situations are subverted. Figurative and latent meanings can also be a way of introducing incongruity in texts. When we talk about humor in teenagers, this is closely related to a progressive ability to contemplate a topic from multiple perspectives and reflect on their own thinking and that of others. The diversity of interest increases, which contributes to a deeper concern for socio-political issues and civic engagement. Also, the development of abstract logical thinking enables playing with figurative and implicit meanings in a more sophisticated way. With increasing participation of figurative meaning in humor, understanding, and creation, meaning is conveyed beyond structural traits. Resources such as irony, metaphor, and puns become more complex. A few researchers have found evidence of the benefits of humor as a coping strategy in children and adolescents. Humor helps to cope with stress and adversity, to self-regulate emotions and reduce feelings of anxiety, stress, anger, fear, frustration. As humor involves perspective taking and enables the approach to sensitive issues, it has been related to the development of empathic processes.
In relation to cartoons, the focus has traditionally been on interpretation processes, both in academic research and in school contexts. In schools, cartoons are usually used as a trigger to address different contents. And what we propose in our study is to change the focus from interpretation to production processes. Cartoons and cartooning present different and several educational advantages. They constitute an attractive and engaging activity, an unusual approach to literacy. It becomes a means of expression, a way for students to present their own viewpoints. It's also a way to promote critical thinking, and an assumption orienting our approach is that the ability to create humor and multimodal text can increase through an explicit pedagogical approach. Between 2019 and 2022, we conducted 5 cartoon workshops on social inequality and social empathy in primary and secondary schools in 5 cities in Patagonia. 101 students between 10 and 20 years old took part. So our workshops were structured into 3 phases. In the first phase, we presented a slideshow and we proposed students to jointly analyze different cartoons. We analyzed the themes and the author's motivation and the different multimodal resources used. In a second phase, we proposed students to create a single panel or a strip cartoon on social inequality and social empathy. And finally, in the third phase, we conducted brief individual interviews in which we asked students to explain us how they had come up with the idea and so on. So here's an example of our slideshow presentation in which we distinguish 2 different kinds of humor, playful humor and what we call the humor of serious humor, to refer to the committed kind of motivation in cartoons.
Among the corpus gathered, we collected 103 graphic productions. 81 were original productions on social inequality and or social empathy. We conducted a category analysis in which we distinguished 4 different dimensions. The author's motivation. The author's motivation can be committed when the author seeks to denounce, alert, or make the reader reflect upon a socio-political theme, or playful motivation when the author seeks to entertain or amuse the reader. We also consider a mix of both, committed and playful. Incongruity, we have already explained previously. Empathic concern, no. Empathic concern, the concern is between characters or from the author towards the situation addressed. This concern can be positive when the suffering of a character is alleviated by another character who shows empathic concern, or negative when a character is indifferent or cruel towards the one that is suffering. And finally, rhetorical resources such as metaphor, irony, sarcasm, antithesis, etc. When we focus on authors' motivation, the large majority of students denounce situations of social inequalities through realistic representations. Only a few combined both committed and a playful approach to address inequalities. We have here an example of a mixed motivation, committed and playful. And this is also a good example of the creation of an effective humorous cartoon just with stick figures. In this situation, in this production, we see a person who takes a $10 bill and goes to the bakery. This person is excited when he sees croissants, but does not have enough money to buy any. In the last panel, we see a rich client who buys a disproportionate number of croissants, leaving only crumbs for the rest of us.
Turning now to incongruity, we found that 59% of the cartoons conveyed a humorous incongruity, whereas the rest deployed narrative resources of the cartoon genre, but did not create a humorous incongruity. One of the multiple challenges we faced during the analysis is to ascertain whether a multimodal text is humorous, that is, if humorous incongruity is operating in the text. The analysis of this cartoon involved long discussions, as it is a tricky one. Is the beggar's huge size a matter of mastering perspective, or is it more a decision of contrasting the 2 characters' different lodging conditions? Well, we opted for the second option. A way to overcome the difficulty of deciding whether a text includes a humorous incongruity is to conceive it as a process, a continuum in which we can identify more than 2 possibilities. So it introduces or it does not introduce a humorous incongruity. On the 2 opposite ends of the continuum, we find humorous drawings and non-humorous drawings. Other texts are multimodal narratives, such as non-humorous comics, in which, despite the fact that no humorous incongruity is detected, we find a variety of narrative resources related to the cartoon genre. So this is an example in which we see one person asking for money to the other, and the other throwing or tossing a coin. So here we don't identify any violation of expectations. This is another example of these non-humorous comics. And here we find the example previously analyzed, in which we could place between humorous cartoons and cartoon-like texts, having in mind this continuum in the creation of a humorous incongruity.
Rhetorical figures such as antitheses, exaggeration, paradox were particularly useful to graphically address these topics. Besides, many students used sarcasm as a means to denounce hypocritical attitudes. One example of this is Lucía's cartoon here, in which a homeless girl asks a man for money. Despite saying that he hasn't got any money, we can see his briefcase full of dollars. Milena's cartoon is an example of paradox. In the first panel, we see two friends having a cup of tea while one of them says, "And that's why you should never let a man control you. Always be an independent woman." On panel number 2, we see her saying, "Oh, my boyfriend is calling me." And on panel number 3, we can see the boyfriend shouting down the phone saying, "Where are you? And why didn't you cook?" Students' empathic concern was evidenced in 3 ways: by denouncing the character's lack of empathy, what we call negative empathy, by depicting positive empathy from one character towards the one that is suffering, or a mix of both. Examples of the first 2 situations are these. Both positive and negative empathy were addressed in most of the student texts. 62% criticized an absence of empathy between characters, while 19% depicted positive empathy between characters. 13% showed characters with both positive and negative empathy. Only 6% of the cartoons did not address this issue.
Okay, now turning to the discussion and concluding the remarks. First thing we can conclude is that the task proposed in our workshops was decidedly challenging, given that students were not only asked to address social inequality by means of a multimodal narrative, but they also had to introduce a humorous incongruity in their cartoons out of the ordinary activity for school settings. Most students created serious humorous cartoons addressing social inequality from a committed motivation. The majority of the cartoons depicted realistic representations of social inequality. Among the rhetorical resources identified, antithesis was the most frequently used. This can be linked to the topic addressed, since inequalities involve contrasts, rich versus poor, men versus women, black versus white, etc. While metaphors are the main resource in press cartoons, they were marginally used in this corpus. Metaphors allow cartoonists to map fictitious elements onto current situations, creating imaginary depictions of reality. The low frequency of metaphors can be one of the reasons why imaginary representations of social inequality in this sample were rare.
The fact that students were able to combine a committed and a playful motivation in only approximately 20% of the cartoons highlights the difficulties in addressing such a serious issue in a playful tone. We hypothesize that addressing this sensitive social issue in an emotionally distanced manner may be challenging. This could result in greater difficulties in creating a humorous incongruity and depicting not realistic scenarios. We can also conclude that the workshop triggered in students an empathic attitude towards the suffering characters, which was evidenced both in their analysis of cartoons during our slideshow presentation and in their own creations. When depicting concrete situations of social inequality in their cartoons, most students denounce the characters' lack of empathy. This emotional connection shows the potential sensitizing effect that humor has.
Encouraging teenagers to use humor critically can help them take a personal standpoint in order to problematize the causes and consequences of social inequality, as well as the social structures that reproduce it. In sum, our research suggests that humor, and in particular cartooning, can be useful means to address sensitive social political issues in teenagers, as well as to enhance their empathic concern and perspective taking. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.